My husband left me after I paid off his $87,000 in student loans, ending our 8-year marriage with a text message while I was on a business trip. He claimed I was too focused on my career and that he needed someone who put the relationship first. Yesterday, his name appeared on the list of applicants for the executive director position at my consulting firm. The look on his face when he walked into the interview room and saw me sitting at the head of the table, that moment made every tearful night worth it. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I'll never forget that rainy Wednesday afternoon last spring. The weather matched my mood perfectly. Dark clouds hanging low, occasional thunder rumbling. In the distance as I pulled into the parking garage of my downtown apartment building. I'd just returned from a particularly exhausting 3-day conference in Chicago, where I'd been representing my team at a major industry event. My presentation had gone exceptionally well, securing us 3 potential new clients, and I couldn't wait to celebrate with Daniel. 8 years of marriage had taught me Daniel's moods, his habits, his rhythms. Something felt off the moment I stepped into our apartment. The living room was too quiet, too tidy. Usually, Daniel would be sprawled on the couch, case files from his law practice scattered across the coffee table, music playing in the background. But today, the silence felt deliberate, heavy with intention. "Daniel?" I called out, setting my carry-on luggage by the entry table. "Are you home early?" No response. I walked through our open-concept living space, noting small discrepancies. The missing throw blanket he always used, the empty spot on the bookshelf where his favorite legal reference books had been, the bare hook by the door where his keys normally hung. A knot formed in my stomach as I walked into our bedroom. The first thing I noticed was his dresser drawers, partially open and visibly emptier. His nightstand had been cleared of the photo of us from our trip to Bali last year. On my pillow lay an envelope with my name written in his familiar handwriting. My hands trembled as I opened it, though some part of me already knew. The signs had been there for months. Late nights at the office, mysterious weekend depositions, the growing emotional distance that had slowly replaced the warmth we once shared. "Megan," the letter began, my name looking foreign on the crisp, white paper. "By the time you read this, I'll have moved out. We both know this isn't working anymore. It hasn't been for a long time." I sank onto the edge of the bed, the mattress barely yielding beneath me, as solid and unyielding as the reality I was facing. The letter continued with clinical precision, detailing how he'd taken only his personal belongings, how he'd be in touch through his attorney regarding the divorce proceedings, how he hoped we could handle this as the mature professionals we both are. No mention of the $87,000 in student loans I'd helped him pay off over the past 5 years while he established his law career. No acknowledgement of the promotion I'd postponed twice because it would have meant relocating when he was just getting established at the firm. No recognition of the countless dinners I'd arranged with senior partners to help him network. The weekends I'd spent editing his briefs instead of pursuing my own projects. The life I'd carefully constructed around supporting his ambitions. My phone buzzed with a text message. Daniel, of course. "I thought a clean break would be easier. I've been trying to tell you for months that I need someone who prioritizes our relationship. Your career always comes first. I deserve more than being an afterthought in your busy schedule." The text felt like a slap. An afterthought? I had structured my entire existence around being his partner, his support system. I'd taken the consulting position at Crawford & Associates specifically because it offered flexibility when he was studying for the bar exam. I'd handled our household management, our social calendar, our financial planning, all while building my own career brick by careful brick. "Is there someone else?" I texted back, the question escaping before I could stop myself. The 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally. That's not the point. But it was exactly the point. his non-answer was answer enough. "Who?" I demanded, anger beginning to displace the initial shock. Another long pause. "Rachel, from the firm." Rachel, his associate, 26 years old, just 2 years out of law school herself. I'd met her at the firm's holiday party last December. Had watched her laugh at Daniel's jokes, had even commented to him afterward about how bright she seemed, how she reminded me of myself at that age. Ambitious, eager to prove herself. "Your associate," I replied flatly. "How original." "It's not like that," came his quick response. "She understands me, Megan. She supports my ambitions, my vision. We connect on a level that you and I haven't in years." Each word cut deeper than he could know. Supports his ambitions? I had deferred my own career advancement multiple times to support his ambitions. I had taken on extra consulting projects to pay off his student loans while he focused on building his reputation at the firm. I had been his sounding board, his cheerleader, his editor, his networking coordinator. "She supports you?" I typed, my fingers shaking with rage. "With what exactly? Her validated parking and junior associate salary? Or did you forget who paid off Yale Law while you were finding your focus?" Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. He didn't respond for several minutes. When he did, his deflection was masterful, a skill honed in courtrooms. "I know you're upset. That's understandable. But turning this into a financial scorekeeping exercise only proves my point. Relationships aren't balance sheets, Megan. Except when they were. Except when one person gave and gave and gave, while the other took and took and took, all while constructing a narrative that somehow made them the victim." I threw my phone across the room, not caring when it hit the wall with a crack. Tears burned in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Not yet. Not until I understood exactly what had happened to my life, my marriage, my carefully constructed future. I moved to our home office, my home office now, and opened my laptop. Within minutes, I had accessed our joint accounts. Most remained untouched, though I noted a large withdrawal from our savings 2 days ago. Enough for a deposit on an apartment, perhaps, or maybe a down payment on the kind of flashy car a young associate might find impressive. Next, I logged into my personal email, the one connected to all our household accounts. There it was, A. Satya, notification from our student loan servicer dated just 3 weeks ago. "Congratulations. Your loan has been paid in full." The final payment on Daniel's law school debt had cleared, the debt we'd agreed to tackle together as an investment in our future. The timing wasn't coincidental. He had waited, deliberately, strategically, waited until his financial obligation to me was complete before making his exit. I sat back in my chair, a bitter laugh escaping me. 8 years together, and I had never truly known the man I married. Or perhaps worse, I had known exactly who he was, but had convinced myself otherwise, constructing an image of him, of us, that bore little resemblance to reality. My phone rang from across the room, where it lay on the bedroom floor. I retrieved it, noting the cracked screen, a fitting metaphor for my current state. It wasn't Daniel calling to apologize or explain further. It was Sophia, my closest friend and colleague at Crawford and Associates. "How was Chicago?" she asked when I answered, her voice bright with genuine interest. "Did they love your presentation? On the Myers proposal?" I opened my mouth to respond normally, to maintain the facade that my world hadn't just imploded. Instead, a sob escaped, raw and unexpected. "Megan?" Sophia's tone immediately shifted to concern. "What's wrong? What happened?" "Daniel left," I managed between ragged breaths. "While I was gone, he just left." "I'm coming over," she said instantly. Don't move. 20 minutes. True to her word, Sophia arrived exactly 19 minutes later, armed with a bottle of wine, a pint of my favorite ice cream, and the fiercely protective expression she usually reserved for difficult clients. Start from the beginning, she instructed after pouring us each a generous glass of Cabernet. And don't leave anything out. So I told her everything. The empty drawers, the cold letter, the text exchange, the revelation about Rachel, the convenient timing after his loans were paid off. That calculating bastard, Sophia muttered when I finished. I always thought there was something off about him. Off how? I asked, genuinely surprised. Sophia had always been polite to Daniel, if not particularly warm. She hesitated, swirling the wine in her glass before answering. He always seemed to be performing, like he was playing the role of dedicated husband, rather than actually being one. The way he'd make those comments about your work hours, but always in front of other people. How he'd talk about supporting your career, but would call you 3 times during important meetings. I stared at her, memories suddenly reshuffling themselves in my mind. The supportive comments that always contained a subtle barb. The jokes about my ambition that landed just shy of insulting. The way he'd position himself as the neglected spouse whenever my work required travel or late nights, despite his own punishing schedule at the firm. And let's be honest, Sophia continued, watching my face carefully. When was the last time he actually supported one of your career moves? Remember when Crawford offered you that promotion to lead the international division? The one you turned down because Daniel said a long-distance relationship would be too hard on your marriage? I remembered all too well. The opportunity had been transformative, a chance to establish our firm's presence in the London market, with a substantial salary increase and equity options. I'd been thrilled until Daniel had pointed out all the ways it would damage our relationship. Somehow, my enthusiasm had turned to guilt, and I'd declined the position, telling myself that marriage required sacrifice. He was always so careful, I said slowly, the realization dawning. Always made it seem like it was my choice, my decision to prioritize us over advancement. While he was advancing just fine, Sophia noted, her tone measured but pointed. Making partner right on schedule. The unfairness of it all hit me with sudden clarifying force. I had dimmed my own light, again and again, to help his shine brighter. And he had not only accepted my sacrifices but had come to expect them, to frame them as the natural order of our relationship. What do I do now? I asked, more to myself than to Sophia. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. First, you protect yourself, legally, financially, emotionally. Then you rebuild, not the life you had, but the one you deserve. That night, after Sophia left, I sat on my balcony watching the city lights blink against the darkening sky. 8 years of my life had just evaporated, leaving me untethered, adrift in possibilities both terrifying and exhilarating. The pain was still there, sharp and insistent, but beneath it stirred something else, something that felt suspiciously like relief. For the first time in years, perhaps, I could make decisions based solely on what I wanted, not what would accommodate Daniel's schedule or advance Daniel's career or fit with Daniel's vision of our life together. Just me, my wishes, my ambitions, my future. I thought about the international division position and wondered if it might still be available. I thought about the consulting projects I'd set aside to help Daniel prepare for big cases. I thought about the professional connections I'd neglected because they didn't offer networking potential for him. Somewhere in those thoughts, a plan began to take shape. Not a reaction to Daniel's betrayal, though that still burned, but a reclamation of the woman I'd been before I started shrinking myself to fit into the narrow space he'd allowed me. I pulled out my laptop and opened a new document. At the top, I typed, Megan 2. 0. The reconstruction plan. Then, with a clarity I hadn't felt in years, I began to list my true desires, my actual goals, my authentic ambitions, not the compromised versions I'd settled for during my marriage. By midnight, I had a roadmap. By 1 a.m., I had drafted emails to key people who would help me execute that roadmap. And by 2 a.m., I had fallen into the first peaceful sleep I'd had in months, unencumbered by the weight of trying to be what someone else needed rather than who I truly was. The real work began the next morning. I contacted a divorce attorney, not one from Daniel's firm or their network, but a sharp, no-nonsense woman recommended by Sophia. I made an appointment with my financial advisor to reassess my position and goals now that I was navigating life solo. I called Crawford's HR department and inquired about any open positions in the international division. Funny you should ask, the HR director said. We're actually struggling to fill that London position you turned down. The first 2 candidates didn't work out, and we're starting to consider internal options again. A spark of hope ignited. I'd like to be considered, I said firmly. My circumstances have changed and I'm available for relocation. That's unexpected but welcome news, she replied. I'll set up a meeting with the executive team for next week. It would be a significant step up from your current role, but given your track record with the Myers account and others, I think they'll be receptive. After hanging up, I stood in my kitchen, heart pounding with a mixture of anxiety and excitement. London, a director-level position, a complete fresh start, an ocean away from Daniel and Rachel, and the social circles where I'd soon be the subject of pitying glances and whispered speculation. Was I really considering this? Uprooting my entire life based on a decision made in the emotional aftermath of my marriage's implosion? I was. And the more I thought about it, the more right it felt. Not as an escape, though there was certainly an element of that, but as a return to the ambitious, confident woman I'd been before I'd started accommodating myself to Daniel's needs and expectations. The following week was a blur of activity. Meetings with the attorney, who assured me that Daniel's timing, leaving immediately after I'd helped him eliminate his student debt, would not look favorable to a judge. Discussions with my financial advisor about restructuring my investments for my new goals. A surprisingly positive conversation with Crawford's executive team about the London position. We always thought you were the ideal candidate, the CEO admitted during our meeting. We were disappointed when you declined. What's changed? I considered how to answer. The truth seemed too personal, too raw for a professional setting. But a half-truth felt dishonest. I've recently gone through some significant personal changes, I said carefully. They've clarified my priorities and removed certain constraints that previously influenced my decision. The CEO nodded, seeming to understand the subtext. Well, their loss is our gain. The position is yours if you want it. Same terms as before, with an added relocation package. We'd need you to start within 60 days. 2 months to divorce Daniel, sell or rent our apartment, pack up 8 years of life, and move to London. It seemed simultaneously impossible, and exactly the challenge I needed. I'll have an answer for you by Friday, I promised, knowing already what that answer would be. As I left the Crawford offices, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Megan, it's Rachel. Can we talk? Please? This isn't what you think. I stared at the message, momentarily blindsided by the audacity. What exactly did she think? This was a simple misunderstanding? A situation where a heart-to-heart over coffee would smooth everything over? There's nothing to discuss, I replied, then blocked the number before she could respond. Minutes later, my phone rang with Daniel's familiar tone, the special ringtone I'd set just for him, a song from our first date. I'd need to change that, along with so many other small, ingrained habits. For a moment, I considered ignoring the call. What could he possibly say that would matter now? But curiosity won out. Or perhaps it was the lingering need for some kind of closure, some explanation that would make sense of the senseless. Yes, I answered, my tone deliberately neutral. Did you just block Rachel? He demanded, skipping any greeting. She was trying to reach out, to explain things from her perspective. The absolute gall left me momentarily speechless. Her perspective, I repeated flatly. On what? How to properly date a married man? How to wait until his wife pays off his student loans before helping him pack his bags? It wasn't like that, Daniel insisted, his lawyer voice in full effect, reasonable, measured, persuasive. Rachel and I. It just happened. We tried to fight it. And the timing with the loans is coincidental. I've been unhappy for years, Megan. You know that. No, I don't know that, I replied, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. What I know is that you constructed a narrative where my career ambitions were somehow a betrayal of our marriage, while your ambitions were the central organizing principle of our life together. What I know is that you waited until you were financially unburdened before walking away. What I know is that you're a coward who left a letter instead of having an actual conversation. This is exactly why, he exploded, his careful control slipping. You turn everything into an attack. You can't just accept that feelings change, that people grow apart. You have to create this whole villain narrative where I'm the calculating bad guy and you're the innocent victim. I laughed, the sound surprising us both. Daniel, I don't need to create any narratives. Your actions speak for themselves. And for the record, I don't consider myself an innocent victim. I was complicit in creating a marriage where my needs consistently came second. That's on me, and it's something I'm correcting now. What does that mean? His tone shifted, wariness replacing anger. It means I'm moving forward with my life. I've accepted the international director position at Crawford. I'll be relocating to London next month. Silence stretched between us, charged with unspoken recriminations and regrets. London, he finally said. So that's your response? Running away to another country? No, I corrected him. That's not my response to you. It's my response to myself, to the opportunities I've been deferring and the potential I've been denying. You're no longer a factor in my decision-making, Daniel. That's what divorce means. After I hung up, I stood in the middle of the sidewalk, oblivious to the pedestrians streaming around me. A weight I hadn't recognized I was carrying seemed to lift from my shoulders. For years, I had unconsciously filtered every choice, every opportunity, every ambition through the prism of our marriage, specifically through how it would affect Daniel's comfort and convenience. No more. From this moment forward, my decisions would be my own, guided by my own North Star, rather than orbiting someone else's sun. That evening, I called the CEO and formally accepted the London position. The next morning, I met with a real estate agent to discuss selling the apartment. By the end of the week, I had initiated divorce proceedings, begun sorting through 8 years of accumulated possessions, and applied for a new passport, in my maiden name, a symbolic reclamation of my identity. Friends rallied around me with surprising ferocity. Sophia organized a packing party, turning what could have been a depressing task into something approaching celebration. Former colleagues I hadn't spoken to in years reached out with connections in London, offering introductions and advice. My parents, initially shocked by the sudden dissolution of my marriage, quickly shifted to unconditional support when they understood the circumstances. "We always thought you dimmed yourself around him," my mother admitted during one of our long phone conversations. "We should have said something sooner." I wouldn't have listened, I told her honestly. I thought I was being a supportive partner. I couldn't see that support only flowed one way. Daniel, meanwhile, oscillated between angry texts accusing me of punishing him by moving abroad and attempts at reconciliation that rang hollow given his continued relationship with Rachel. His final effort came 3 weeks before my scheduled departure, when he showed up unannounced at the apartment, which was now half-packed in boxes. I made a mistake, he said, standing awkwardly in what had once been our shared living room. Rachel and I? It's already falling apart. She's not you, Meg. No one could be. I studied him, this man I had once built my life around. He looked smaller somehow, less substantial, as if my changing perspective had literally diminished him. That's the point, Daniel, I said quietly. No one should be trying to be me or replace me, and I'm no longer interested in being the version of myself that you needed, the one who constantly compromised her own ambitions to support yours. I never asked you to do that, he protested. You never had to ask explicitly, I countered. You created conditions where it was the only way to maintain peace, where your career emergencies always trumped mine, where my opportunities were discussed in terms of how they might inconvenience you, while yours were celebrated regardless of how they affected me. He had no response to that, perhaps because he recognized the truth in it, or perhaps because he still couldn't see the fundamental imbalance that had characterized our relationship. The divorce papers are with your attorney, I said, when the silence had stretched uncomfortably long. The sooner you sign them, the sooner we can both truly move forward. He left without further argument, and I didn't hear from him again before my departure for London. The divorce was finalized in my absence, the apartment sold, the proceeds divided as per our agreement. I threw myself into my new role at Crawford's London office, reveling in the challenges and opportunities it presented. The first year was hard, establishing a new team, learning the nuances of the European market, building a life in a foreign city. But it was also exhilarating in its possibility, in the pure freedom of making choices based solely on my own needs and desires. I dated casually, but guarded my independence fiercely, unwilling to compromise myself again for any relationship. I cultivated new friendships, rediscovered old interests I'd abandoned during my marriage, and gradually built a life that felt authentically mine in a way my existence with Daniel never had. Crawford London thrived under my leadership. We secured major accounts, expanded our team, and significantly increased revenue. My success drew notice from the parent company, and when the CEO announced his retirement 2 years after my relocation, my name appeared on the short list of potential successors. The interview process was grueling. Multiple rounds with the board, presentations on my vision for the company, assessments of my leadership style. When the call finally came, I was in the middle of a weekend hike in the Cotswolds, part of my new commitment to balancing work with personal rejuvenation. Congratulations, Megan, the board chair said when I answered. We'd like to offer you the CEO position. You'll need to relocate back to the States, of course. Can you be in New York next week to discuss details? CEO of Crawford and Associates, the company where I'd once declined a director position because my husband thought it might strain our marriage. The irony wasn't lost on me. I returned to New York the following month, stepping into my role as CEO with a confidence I'd never felt during my previous time in the city. My professional transformation was remarkable enough, but the personal growth was what truly sustained me. I'd learned to trust my instincts, to value my contributions, and to never again make myself small for someone else's comfort. The Crawford and Associates headquarters occupied 3 floors of a gleaming skyscraper in Midtown Manhattan. My corner office offered panoramic views of the city skyline, a daily reminder of how far I'd come from that rainy afternoon when I'd returned to an empty apartment and a goodbye letter. The senior leadership team is assembled in the main conference room, my executive assistant Victor informed me as I reviewed the quarterly projections on my second Monday as CEO. They're eager to hear about your strategic vision for the Asian expansion. I gathered my materials and made my way down the corridor, nodding to staff members who still regarded me with a mixture of curiosity and reverence. The transition had been swift. Many were still adjusting to the idea of a female CEO who had rocketed from director to top executive in under 3 years. The conference room fell silent as I entered. 8 faces turned toward me, some familiar from my London days, others still knew. I took my place at the head of the table, feeling a moment of surreal clarity. This was mine, not inherited, not married into, not given, earned through perseverance, intelligence, and refusing to settle for less than I deserved. "Good morning, everyone," I began, my voice steady and authoritative. "Before we dive into the Asian markets, I want to share something personal about leadership." The executive straightened, clearly not expecting this departure from the agenda. 3 years ago, I was told by someone important to me that my ambition was a liability, that wanting success meant I wasn't capable of maintaining meaningful relationships. I paused, meeting the eyes of each person around the table. I internalized that message for too long. Many of you, especially the women in this room, may have heard similar things throughout your careers. Several heads nodded, particularly from the female executives. Today, I want to make something abundantly clear. At Crawford & Associates, ambition is not a character flaw. Drive is not a defect. The desire to excel will never be treated as a personality failure. I leaned forward slightly. Under my leadership, this company will celebrate achievement while fostering balance. We will pursue growth without sacrificing our humanity. And we will never ask our people to choose between professional fulfillment and personal happiness. The room remained silent, but the energy had shifted palpably. Several of the executives were nodding, others leaning forward with renewed interest. "Now," I continued, opening my presentation folder, "let's talk about how that philosophy informs our approach to the Asian market expansion." The meeting ran longer than scheduled, vibrant with ideas and constructive debate. As the team filed out afterward, Sophia, who had relocated to New York with me as our new chief operating officer, lingered behind. "That was quite an opening statement," she said, gathering her notes. "Personal but powerful." I smiled, shuffling my own papers. I spent too many years censoring myself. No point becoming CEO if I'm going to start doing it again. "Speaking of censoring," Sophia lowered her voice, "have you seen the applicant list for the executive director of legal affairs position?" I frowned, quickly scanning my mental calendar. "Not yet. The preliminary interviews are next week, right?" Sophia nodded, her expression carefully neutral. "You might want to review the candidates before then. There's a name you'll recognize." A chill of premonition ran through me. Who? Daniel Harrington. The name hit like a physical blow. Daniel, my ex-husband, applying for a senior position at my company. "There must be a mistake," I said, my mouth suddenly dry. "He's a partner at Montgomery & Reed. Why would he be applying here?" Sophia shrugged. "I don't know the details, but HR confirmed it's definitely him. His resume came in last week and he's scheduled for a preliminary interview on Tuesday." I sank back into my chair, mind racing. Daniel applying to Crawford & Associates couldn't be coincidence. He must have heard about my appointment as CEO. It had been announced in all the major business publications. Was this some kind of power play? An attempt to disrupt the new life I'd built? Or something more mundane? Perhaps Montgomery & Reed was struggling and he needed a job? "Your call," Sophia said, watching me process this information. "We can have HR remove him from consideration, citing potential conflict of interest. No, one would question it." I considered the option. It would be the simplest solution. Clean, professional, avoiding any messy confrontation. But something in me rebelled against the idea. "No," I said finally. "Let the process continue normally." Sophia raised an eyebrow. "You sure about that? It could get complicated." "I'm sure." A plan was already forming in my mind. "In fact, I'd like to sit in on his interview." "Megan." Sophia's tone held a warning. "Not to ambush him," I clarified. "But I need to understand his motivations. And I want him to know that I'm making this decision with full awareness of our history." Sophia studied me for a long moment before nodding. Your company, your call. I'll have HR adjust the schedule so you can attend. Over the weekend, I found myself uncharacteristically distracted. I checked Daniel's application materials multiple times, searching for clues about his current circumstances. His resume showed he was still at Montgomery and Reed, though I noted he was listed as senior counsel rather than partner. A demotion? The cover letter was generic, highlighting his experience and expertise without explaining why he wanted to leave his current position. Curiosity getting the better of me, I reached out to a former colleague who had connections at several law firms, including Montgomery and Reed. Daniel Harrington? She said when I called. Oh, there's quite a story. There. Apparently, he was on partnership track, but then something happened with a junior associate, an inappropriate relationship that caused problems when it ended badly. The firm kept it quiet, but he was removed from the partnership track and put on probation. Word is he's been job hunting for months. An inappropriate relationship. Rachel, most likely. The woman he'd left me for had apparently been a stepping stone rather than a destination. I felt no satisfaction at this news, just a hollow confirmation of what I'd already suspected about Daniel's character. Tuesday arrived with a knot of tension in my stomach. I dressed with particular care, a tailored navy suit that projected authority without ostentation, simple pearl earrings that had been a gift to myself after my first successful quarter in London, hair pulled back in a sleek chignon. Armor of sorts for the confrontation ahead. The interview was scheduled for 2 p.m. in one of the smaller conference rooms. I arranged to arrive after Daniel had been greeted by the HR director and the hiring manager, slipping in quietly while he was answering a question about his experience with international corporate law. The moment our eyes met, Daniel faltered mid-sentence. Shock, disbelief, and something like fear flashed across his face before he recovered his composure. And that's why I believe my experience with cross-border negotiations would be particularly valuable to Crawford and Associates, he finished, his voice only slightly strained. Thank you, Mr. Harrington, the HR director said. I'd like to introduce our CEO, Megan Reynolds, who has joined us for this portion of the interview. I stepped forward, extending my hand across the table. Mr. Harrington, a pleasure. Daniel took my hand, his palm slightly damp. Ms. Reynolds, I wasn't expecting to see you here. I like to be involved in key senior hires, I replied smoothly, taking a seat. Particularly for positions that will work closely with the executive team. The HR director and hiring. Manager exchanged glances, clearly sensing the undercurrent of tension but professional enough not to comment on it. Perhaps, Ms. Reynolds, you have some specific questions for Mr. Harrington? The hiring manager suggested. I smiled pleasantly. I do, actually. Mr. Harrington, I notice you're currently at Montgomery and Reed, where you've been for several years. Why are you looking to make a change at this point in your career? Daniel shifted in his seat. I'm seeking new challenges. Montgomery has been an excellent firm, but I believe my skills could be better utilized in a more dynamic organization with international reach. Interesting, I replied. Because my understanding is that you were on partnership track at Montgomery, until recently. Most attorneys don't voluntarily step away from that opportunity without compelling reason. A muscle twitched in Daniel's jaw. As I said, I'm looking for new challenges. Partnership at Montgomery would have been gratifying, but ultimately limiting in scope. I see. I glanced down at his resume. And your experience with complex corporate restructuring. That would have been the Westfield Industries case, correct? I believe that was during our marriage when you were still at Pearson & Lowe. The HR director's eyebrows rose slightly at this revelation. Daniel's composure slipped for a moment before he recovered. Yes, that's correct, he answered stiffly. Westfield was one of my early major cases. As I recall, I continued, keeping my tone professionally curious. You were the junior associate on that team. Your contribution was primarily research and document preparation, wasn't it? Not lead strategy or client management? Daniel's face flushed. I had significant responsibilities on that case, as noted in my resume. Of course, I smiled thinly. I'm just trying to establish the precise nature of your experience, given that the executive director position requires extensive leadership capabilities. The interview continued in this vein for another 20 minutes, me asking pointed questions that exposed the embellishments on Daniel's resume, him growing increasingly defensive and flustered. By the time I excused myself, ostensibly for another meeting, beads of sweat had formed on his upper lip. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Harrington," I said, rising from my chair. "HR will be in touch regarding next steps in the process." Outside, the conference room, I leaned against the wall, heart pounding but mind surprisingly clear. I hadn't intended to be so direct, so pointed in my questioning. But seeing him sitting there, polished and confident, spinning his experience into something grander than reality, it had triggered something primal in me, a need to strip away the facade he presented to the world. Sophia was waiting in my office when I returned. "Well?" she asked, arching an eyebrow. "It was enlightening," I replied, sinking into my chair. "Did you eviscerate him completely, or leave some scraps of dignity intact?" I laughed despite myself. I was professional. Mostly, I just asked questions that highlighted certain inconsistencies in his application. Uh-huh. Sophia's skeptical tone made it clear she suspected more had transpired. "And now?" "Now we follow the normal process," I said firmly. "If the hiring committee determines he's the best candidate, based on qualifications and interview performance, so be it." Sophia gave me a look of disbelief. "You can't seriously be considering hiring your ex-husband." "Of course not," I admitted. "But I want this handled properly. No special treatment, positive or negative, because of our history." Later that afternoon, the HR director requested a meeting. She arrived with a folder containing notes from Daniel's interview and a troubled expression. "Ms. Reynolds," she began carefully, "I feel obligated to mention that there was tension during Mr. Harrington's interview that went beyond typical assessment." I nodded, appreciating her directness. "You're right, Diane. I should have disclosed up front that Mr. Harrington is my former husband." Her eyes widened slightly. "I see. That does explain the dynamic I observed." "I apologize for putting you in an awkward position," I said sincerely. "It was unprofessional of me not to recuse myself from his interview process entirely." Diane seemed relieved by my acknowledgement. "Given this information, how would you like us to proceed? Mr. Harrington has the qualifications for the position, though there were some concerns about potential exaggerations in his experience." I considered the question carefully. The vindictive part of me wanted to reject his application outright, to give him a taste of the dismissal he had so casually inflicted on me. But that wasn't the leader I aspired to be. Nor was it the person I had worked so hard to become these past 3 years. "Please continue evaluating him according to our standard protocols," I instructed. "If he makes it to the final round, I'll recuse myself from the decision due to our prior relationship. The hiring committee can make the final determination without my input." Diane nodded, clearly relieved. "Thank you for your transparency, Ms. Reynolds. We'll proceed accordingly." After she left, I turned to the window, gazing out at the city skyline as afternoon shadows lengthened across the buildings. Was I handling this correctly? The situation was unprecedented in my professional experience, having to evaluate my ex-husband as a potential executive at my company. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Megan, it's Daniel. Can we talk? Privately. Please." I stared at the message, weighing my options. Ignoring him was tempting, but potentially unprofessional. Agreeing to meet might open old wounds. After a moment's consideration, I replied, "My office, 5:30 p.m., 15 minutes only." His response was immediate. "Thank you. I'll be there." At precisely 5:30, Victor announced Daniel's arrival. I took a deep breath, centering myself before instructing Victor to send him in. Daniel entered cautiously, as if expecting an ambush. He looked much as he had during the interview. Expensively dressed but somehow diminished. The confidence I remembered replaced by a watchful wariness. "Thank you for seeing me," he said, remaining standing until I gestured toward a chair. "You have 15 minutes, Daniel. What did you want to discuss?" He sat, hands clasped tightly in his lap. "First, I want to apologize for today. I should have withdrawn my application when I learned you were CEO. Applying here was inappropriate, given our history." "Why did you apply?" I asked, genuinely curious. "You must have known I was with Crawford. My appointment was in all the industry publications." He had the grace to look embarrassed. "I knew, yes, but I didn't expect you to be involved in the interview process. I thought I could just be another employee. That maybe we could coexist professionally, given enough separation within the organization." "That seems naive," I observed. "An executive director works directly with the CEO on a regular basis." Daniel sighed, running a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar it sent an unexpected pang through me. "The truth is, I'm in a difficult position. Things at Montgomery didn't work out as I'd hoped. Because of Rachel?" His head snapped up, surprise evident. "You know about that?" "Legal circles talk, Daniel, just like any other industry." He nodded slowly. "Yes, because of Rachel. Among other things. She wasn't who I thought she was." "Funny how that works," I said, unable to keep the edge from my voice. Daniel winced. "I deserve that. I deserve worse, honestly. The way I left you was unconscionable. I've regretted it every day since." "Have you?" I leaned back in my chair, studying him. "Or have you regretted the consequences? Because those are very different things, Daniel." "Both," he admitted after a moment. "I regret hurting you, deeply. And yes, I regret the mess I made of my life afterward. Rachel wasn't. She wasn't. You. No one has been." I felt a flash of anger. "Don't do that. Don't romanticize what we had just because what came after wasn't what you expected. Our marriage was deeply flawed, Daniel. You just didn't see it because the flaws benefited you." He looked genuinely perplexed. "What do you mean?" "I mean," I said carefully, "that our relationship was structured around your needs, your career, your ambitions. I diminished myself to fit into the space you allowed me, and you were content with that arrangement until it required actual reciprocity." Daniel was silent for a long moment, processing my words. When he spoke again, his voice was subdued. "I never saw it that way. I thought we were partners." "Partners share burdens equally," I countered. "They celebrate each other's successes without resentment. They don't keep score or attribute selfish motives to normal ambition." He nodded slowly. "I see that now. Too late, obviously." An uncomfortable silence stretched between us. The anger I'd expected to feel was strangely absent, replaced by something more complex. A mixture of pity, vindication, and a peculiar gratitude for the painful journey that had led me here. To this moment of clarity and power. "Your 15 minutes are nearly up," I said finally. "Was there something specific you wanted to discuss beyond apologizing?" Daniel straightened, composing himself. "Yes, actually. I wanted to ask if you would consider allowing me to withdraw my application rather than being rejected. It would." It would make a significant difference to my professional reputation. I studied him, this man I had once built my life around. 3 years ago, I might have savored the opportunity to deny his request, to inflict a small fraction of the pain he had caused me. But that woman, the one who measured her worth by his approval, who shrank herself to accommodate his ego, she no longer existed. Of course, I said simply, I'll have HR process it as a withdrawal rather than a rejection. Is that all? Relief washed over his face. Yes. Thank you, Megan. I know you didn't have to do that. No, I didn't, I agreed. But vindictiveness isn't a quality I cultivate anymore. It takes too much energy that's better spent elsewhere. Daniel rose to leave, then hesitated. You've done amazingly well, he said, gesturing to the office, the view, the trappings of the success I'd achieved. I always knew you were capable of greatness, but this exceeds even what I imagined for you. I smiled, a genuine smile that held no bitterness. That was always the difference between us, Daniel. You imagined limits for me. I finally stopped accepting them. After he left, I remained at my desk, watching the city lights emerge as dusk settled over Manhattan. The encounter had been surreal, my ex-husband essentially asking for professional mercy from the woman he had once dismissed as too career-focused, too ambitious. The irony wasn't lost on me, but neither was the profound realization that I no longer needed his validation or regret to feel complete. The woman who had sobbed on her kitchen floor, who had questioned her worth when he left, who had doubted her capacity for both professional success and personal fulfillment, she had transformed into someone stronger, wiser, and immeasurably more self-possessed. My phone buzzed with a message from Sophia. Dinner tonight? I want all the details. I smiled, gathering my things. The Daniel chapter of my life was finally, truly closed. Not because he had apologized or suffered consequences for his actions, but because I had outgrown the need for either outcome to feel whole. As I prepared to leave, I caught sight of my reflection in the window, backlit by my office lights, the Manhattan skyline a glittering backdrop behind me. 3 years ago, in the depths of heartbreak and betrayal, I could never have imagined this version of myself. Confident, powerful, at peace. It hadn't been an easy journey. There had been moments of crippling self-doubt, of questioning whether I was making the right choices, of wondering if I was running away rather than toward something meaningful. But each decision, accepting the London position, pursuing the CEO role, returning to New York on my own terms, had been a step toward reclaiming not just my career, but my essential self. I texted Sophia back, definitely dinner, and maybe champagne. We have things to celebrate. As the elevator descended to the lobby, I thought about the countless women who found themselves where I had been 3 years ago, diminished by relationships that valued their support more than their ambitions, their sacrifice more than their success. If my story could inspire even one of them to reclaim their power, to remember their worth, to rebuild their lives on their own terms, well, that would be a legacy worth far more than a corner office with a view. Sophia and I clinked glasses at Maison Marcel, the French bistro downtown that had become our regular celebration spot. The candlelight cast a warm glow across the table, illuminating the bubbles dancing in our champagne flutes. To karma, Sophia toasted, her eyes sparkling with mischief, and to the look on Daniel's face when he realized his potential boss was the wife he discarded. I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in weeks. It wasn't about revenge, you know. I genuinely didn't expect him to apply here. Of course not, Sophia agreed, though her tone suggested she wouldn't have minded if revenge had been on the agenda. But you have to admit, the universe has a certain poetry to it sometimes. She wasn't wrong. There was something undeniably poetic about Daniel seeking employment from the woman whose career ambitions he had once dismissed as a threat to their marriage. The woman who had put her dreams on hold to support his, who had paid off his student loans while he focused on building his reputation, who had been told her drive was the problem in their relationship. "Tell me everything," Sophia demanded, breaking into my thoughts. Did he grovel? Did he try to explain? Did he ask for your forgiveness? I recounted the meeting in detail. His apology, his request to withdraw his application rather than face rejection, his awkward acknowledgement of my success. "And how did it feel?" Sophia asked when I finished. "Seeing him like that? Needing something from you for a change?" I considered the question, trying to articulate the complex emotions Daniel's visit had triggered. "It felt clarifying," I said finally. Like the final piece of a puzzle clicking into place. For years, even after everything he did, there was this small, insecure part of me that wondered if he was right. If my ambition really was the problem. If I actually was incapable of balancing career and relationship. And now? Now I know with absolute certainty that was never true, I said firmly. The problem wasn't my ambition. It was his inability to see me as a whole person with dreams as valid as his own. And that's not a reflection on me. It's a limitation in him. Sophia nodded slowly, understanding in her eyes. That's a powerful realization. It is, I agreed. And it's not just about Daniel. It's about every relationship going forward. Professional, personal, whatever. I now know exactly what I won't compromise on, what I won't diminish about myself to make someone else comfortable. Our meals arrived, coq au vin for me, bouillabaisse for Sophia, momentarily pausing our conversation. As we ate, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had led me to this moment. 3 years earlier, I'd been shattered by betrayal, questioning every choice I'd made. Now I was CEO of a global consulting firm, sitting across from my closest friend and COO, celebrating not just professional achievement, but personal reclamation. "You know what the strangest part is?" I said, setting down my fork. "I'm actually grateful to him in a way." Sophia's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "To Daniel, the man who left you with a letter while you were on a business trip? Who waited until you'd paid off his student loans before walking out? That Daniel?" I laughed at her incredulity. "Yes, that Daniel. Not because he deserves gratitude, but because his leaving forced me to confront how much I'd compromised, how far I'd strayed from my own path. Without that painful catalyst, I might still be there, successful by most standards, but fundamentally, limited by someone else's vision of who I should be." Sophia considered this, twirling pasta around her fork. "I see that. Though I still think he's a calculating bastard who got exactly what he deserved." "No argument there," I agreed, raising my glass in another toast. "But his calculation ultimately miscalculated, and that's something worth celebrating." Later that night, as my driver navigated the Manhattan streets toward my Tribeca loft, I scrolled through emails on my phone, addressing the most urgent matters before morning. A message from an unfamiliar address caught my attention, the subject, line simply reading, "Thank you." I opened it cautiously, then felt my breath catch as I read, "Megan, I don't expect a response to this, and I'll understand if you delete it unread. But after seeing you today, I felt compelled to write. You were right about our marriage, about how it was structured around my needs, my career, my comfort. I didn't see it then because, as you said, the imbalance benefited me. It was easier to blame your ambition than to acknowledge my own insecurity about your potential. The truth is, your success always intimidated me. I saw how brilliant you were, how capable, and instead of celebrating that, I tried to contain it. I convinced myself I was being supportive when really, I was ensuring you remained in a role that never threatened my ego. When you mentioned paying off my student loans today, it forced me to confront something I've avoided acknowledging. I didn't just betray you emotionally when I left, I exploited you financially. I waited until that burden was cleared before walking away, and there's no justification for that kind of calculation. I won't ask for forgiveness because I don't deserve it. But I wanted you to know that I recognize the harm I caused, and I genuinely regret it. The woman I glimpsed today, confident, powerful, whole, is who you always were beneath the constraints I helped place on you. You were never the problem in our marriage. I was. And while it brings me no joy to admit that, there's a certain peace in finally acknowledging the truth. Wishing you continued success, Daniel. I stared at the screen, emotions churning. His words seemed sincere, reflecting an awareness I'd never witnessed during our marriage or in the immediate aftermath of our divorce. But was this genuine growth on his part, or simply the desperate backpedaling of a man whose professional options were limited? Did it even matter? 3 years ago, I would have agonized over this message, analyzing every word, seeking validation in his belated recognition of my worth. Now I simply felt unburdened. His acknowledgement neither added to nor subtracted from the woman I had become in his absence. Without overthinking it, I replied, "Daniel, thank you for your honesty. I hope you find healing and growth in this challenging time." Megan. Short. Simple. Closed. As I pressed send, I realized it was the final period at the end of a chapter I'd already emotionally concluded. Whatever Daniel did with his regret, his recognition, his apology, that was his journey now, not mine. My phone rang almost immediately after, displaying an unfamiliar number with a Chicago area code. Curious, I answered. "Megan Reynolds speaking." "Ms. Reynolds, this is Thomas Weston from the Chicago Business Journal. I apologize for calling so late, but we're finalizing our Women in Leadership special issue, and your name keeps coming up in our conversations with industry leaders." I straightened in my seat, switching to professional mode. "No apology necessary, Mr. Weston. How can I help you?" "We'd like to feature you as our cover profile," he explained. "Your trajectory from director to CEO in 3 years, the impressive growth at Crawford's London office under your leadership, your innovative approach to the Asian market expansion. It's exactly the kind of success story our readers would find compelling." "I'm flattered," I said, genuinely surprised by the request. "What would this entail?" "An in-depth interview, a professional photo shoot, possibly a video component for our digital edition," he replied. "We're particularly interested in your perspective on balancing ambition with authentic leadership, a theme that resonates strongly with our audience." Balancing ambition with authentic leadership. The irony wasn't lost on me, being asked to speak about the very quality Daniel had framed as my greatest flaw. "That sounds like a conversation worth having," I agreed. "Have your office contact my executive assistant to coordinate schedules." After ending the call, I leaned back against the car's leather seat, watching the city lights blur past the window. From being told my ambition was destroying my marriage to being featured in a business magazine specifically because of that ambition, the contrast was striking. The car pulled up to my building, the doorman rushing to open my door despite the late hour. "Evening, Ms. Reynolds. Lovely night, isn't it?" "It is indeed, Henry," I agreed, tipping him generously as I did each night. "It really is." My loft occupied the entire top floor of a converted textile factory with exposed brick walls, towering windows, and an open floor plan I'd furnished with an eclectic mix of modern and vintage pieces. It was entirely mine in a way my shared apartment with Daniel had never been. Every choice, every object, every color reflecting my personal aesthetic rather than a compromised vision. I kicked off my heels, poured a glass of water, and wandered to the wall of windows overlooking the Hudson River. The city sparkled below, a constellation of lights against the darkness. Somewhere in that glittering landscape, Daniel was processing our encounter, perhaps reading my brief reply to his email. Somewhere, too, were countless women like the one I had been, dimming their light to keep peace, shrinking their ambitions to fit someone else's comfort, putting their dreams on hold, for relationships that demanded imbalanced sacrifice. The thought prompted me to open my laptop and begin typing. If the Chicago Business Journal wanted my perspective on ambition and leadership, perhaps I could offer something more valuable than the standard success narrative. Something that might reach those women, might help them recognize their own worth before a painful catalyst forced the realization. The words flowed easily, a blend of professional insight and personal truth. True leadership begins with leading yourself, having the courage to pursue your authentic path even when those closest to you question your choices or frame your ambition as selfishness. For many women, this is our greatest challenge, distinguishing between legitimate compromise and fundamental self-diminishment. I continued writing long into the night, the essay evolving beyond the original intent into something more personal, more raw, a testimony to the journey from self-doubt to self-reclamation. When I finally closed my laptop around 3 a.m., I had something that felt honest in a way few business profiles ever allowed. The following morning, I forwarded the draft to the journalist with a note explaining that while it diverged from the typical executive profile, it represented the message I most wanted to share with their readers. His response came within the hour, enthusiastic about the refreshingly candid approach, and assuring me they would feature it prominently in the issue. 3 weeks later, the magazine arrived at my office, my image on the cover beneath the headline, Megan Reynolds on Ambition, Authenticity, and the Courage to Choose Yourself. Inside, my essay ran alongside professional photos and sidebar quotes from colleagues about my leadership style. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Emails flooded my inbox from women around the country, young professionals, seasoned, executives, entrepreneurs, even college students, all sharing how the piece had resonated with their experiences. Many described relationships where their ambitions had been subtly or overtly discouraged, where they'd been made to feel selfish for pursuing their goals, where they'd compromised fundamental aspects of themselves to maintain peace. Sophia burst into my office mid-morning, waving the magazine. Have you seen Twitter? LinkedIn? Your article is everywhere. Women are sharing it like crazy, tagging their friends, starting conversations about ambition and relationships. You've struck a serious nerve. I smiled, simultaneously pleased and slightly overwhelmed by the reaction. I just wrote my truth. I didn't expect it to resonate so widely. That's exactly why it does resonate, Sophia insisted, dropping into a chair across from my desk. It's authentic. You didn't sugarcoat the painful parts or present some polished, sanitized version of your journey. You admitted how much you compromised, how long it took you to recognize the imbalance, how hard it was to rebuild afterward. That honesty gives other women permission to acknowledge their own situations. She wasn't wrong. The most common theme in the responses I'd received was gratitude for the permission to acknowledge ambition without apology, to recognize that wanting professional fulfillment wasn't inherently selfish or incompatible with meaningful relationships. Over the following days, interview requests poured in from podcasts, television programs, even a documentary filmmaker interested in featuring my story as part of a series on women in leadership. I accepted selectively, balancing these opportunities with my primary responsibilities at Crawford, while ensuring the core message remained consistent. Your ambition is not a character flaw. Your desire for fulfillment is not selfishness. Your worth is not determined by someone else's comfort with your success. 6 weeks after the article's publication, I received an invitation to deliver the keynote address at the Global Women's Leadership Summit in San Francisco, an annual gathering of female executives, entrepreneurs, and emerging leaders from around the world. The theme that year was Redefining Success, Authentic Leadership in a Changing World. I accepted immediately, recognizing the opportunity to expand the conversation beyond my personal experience to address the systemic issues that led so many women to diminish their ambitions in both professional and personal contexts. The preparation for the keynote became a journey in itself. I interviewed dozens of women at various stages of their careers, gathering their stories of compromise, recognition, and reclamation. I consulted with researchers studying gender dynamics in leadership. I reflected deeply on my own continued evolution, the ongoing process of unlearning patterns established during my marriage, of recognizing when I defaulted to old habits of self-diminishment even in my new position of power. The day of the summit arrived with perfect San Francisco weather, crisp, clear, the bay glittering beneath the morning sun. The venue was packed with nearly 2,000 attendees, the atmosphere electric with the energy of women who had gathered, not just to network but to genuinely connect over shared experiences and challenges. As I waited backstage, reviewing my notes one final time, a young woman approached, the executive assistant to the summit's organizer, according to her badge. "Ms. Reynolds," she began hesitantly, "I just wanted to say thank you. Your article. It changed my life." I looked up, surprised by the personal address. "I'm glad it resonated with you. I was engaged to someone who constantly made me feel guilty about my career goals," she continued, words tumbling out as if she'd rehearsed them but still feared losing her nerve. He would say things like, "Ambitious women make terrible wives, and you'll have to choose eventually, career or family." I kept shrinking myself, turning down opportunities, trying to prove I could be both ambitious and loving. She took a deep breath. "After reading your piece, I recognized the pattern. I realized it wasn't my ambition that was the problem. It was his insecurity about it. 2 weeks later, I ended the engagement and accepted a promotion I'd been considering declining because he didn't want to date his boss." The simplicity and courage of her decision moved me deeply. "That couldn't have been easy," I said softly. "It wasn't," she agreed. "But as you wrote, the pain of self-betrayal eventually exceeds the pain of others' disappointment." That line changed everything for me. Before I could respond, the summit organizer appeared, signaling it was time. For my introduction, I squeezed the young woman's hand briefly. "Thank you for sharing that with me. It means more than you know." As I walked onto the stage to enthusiastic applause, I felt a profound sense of purpose, not just as a CEO or a business leader, but as a woman speaking truth that might help others avoid the painful lessons I'd had to learn through betrayal and loss. "Good morning," I began, surveying the sea of attentive faces. "I'm here today because 3 years ago, my husband left me, after I paid off his $87,000 in student loans. He told me my ambition was destroying our marriage, that I needed to choose between career success and relationship happiness." The room fell completely silent, surprised by the personal disclosure from someone introduced as the CEO of a global consulting firm. Yesterday, his name appeared on the list of candidates for an executive position at my company. I paused, allowing the irony to sink in. And while there's a certain poetic justice in that sequence of events, that's not actually the story I want to share with you today. I moved away from the podium, approaching the edge of the stage to create a more intimate connection with the audience. The real story, the one that matters, is about what happened in between those 2 points. It's about the journey from believing my ambition was a character flaw to recognizing it as an essential part of my authentic self. It's about the difficult process of unlearning patterns of self-diminishment that I had mistaken for normal compromise. And most importantly, it's about the realization that choosing yourself isn't selfish. It's necessary for any meaningful contribution to the world. For the next 40 minutes, I shared not just my personal journey, but the collective wisdom gathered from women across industries and experiences. I spoke about the subtle ways we're conditioned to prioritize others' comfort over our own fulfillment, the false dichotomy often presented between ambition and connection, the courage required to redefine success on our own terms. The truth, I concluded, Is that authentic ambition, ambition aligned with your core values and genuine interests, doesn't diminish your capacity for meaningful connection. It enhances it. When you honor your own path, when you refuse to shrink yourself to make others comfortable, you bring your whole, authentic self to every relationship. And that authenticity, that wholeness, is the foundation of true connection. The applause that followed was thunderous, the standing ovation immediate and unified. As I made my way back through the audience toward the exit, women reached out to briefly touch my arm, to murmur thanks, to share quick snippets of their own stories. In the quiet of the green room afterward, I checked my phone to find dozens of notifications, including an email that caught my attention immediately. The sender, Rachel Miller, Daniel's former associate, the woman he had left me for. My finger hovered over the delete button, then paused. Curiosity won out. Ms. Reynolds. It began formally. You don't know me, though we met briefly years ago at a firm holiday party. I was Daniel Harrington's associate, and later, briefly, his partner after he left his marriage to you. I braced myself for recrimination, for defense of Daniel, for accusation. I watched your keynote address via the summit's livestream today, and I feel compelled to write. Your story, particularly your description of gradually diminishing yourself to maintain a relationship, resonated deeply. That pattern eventually repeated itself in my relationship with Daniel, though it took me much longer to recognize it than it should have. I read on, surprised by her candor as she described her own eventual disillusionment with Daniel, how the qualities he initially praised in her ambition, her directness, her independent thinking, gradually became sources of conflict as her career advanced. I don't write seeking sympathy or forgiveness, she concluded, but I wanted you to know that your willingness to speak so honestly about your experience has helped me make sense of my own. Thank you for that unexpected gift. I sat with the email for several minutes, considering the strange symmetry of it, how Daniel had moved from me to Rachel, bringing the same patterns and expectations, creating the same eventual disillusionment. How both of us had found our way back to our authentic selves only after the painful catalyst of his departure. Without overthinking it, I replied simply, Rachel, thank you for your note. The patterns we accept in relationships often reflect what we believe we deserve. I'm glad you've recognized your worth extends beyond those limitations. Wishing you continued strength in your journey. Megan. As I prepared to leave for the airport, my phone rang with a call from Victor, my executive assistant. Ms. Reynolds, I apologize for interrupting your summit day, but there's a situation at the office you should be aware of. Daniel Harrington has been trying to reach you. He's called multiple times, each time more insistent. He's claiming it's an urgent personal matter. I felt a flicker of concern, quickly replaced by wariness. Did he say what this urgent matter involves? No, ma'am. Only that he needs to speak with you directly and that it cannot wait. I considered the possibilities. A genuine emergency seemed unlikely. We had no children, no remaining joint property, no ongoing financial entanglements. More probable was that he had somehow learned about my keynote address, perhaps even about Rachel reaching out to me. Thank you for letting me know, Victor. Please inform Mr. Harrington that I'm traveling today, but will be back in the office tomorrow afternoon. If it's truly urgent, he can put whatever it is in writing and email it to my attention. Yes, ma'am. Enjoy the rest of your summit. On the flight back to New York, I reflected on the strange full-circle quality of recent events. 3 years ago, Daniel had walked away from our marriage, believing he deserved more than a wife with ambitions that occasionally took precedence over his needs. Now he was essentially chasing me, trying to command attention I was no longer obligated to give. The symmetry wasn't lost on me, but neither was the profound difference in my response. 3 years ago, his departure had devastated me, triggering frantic attempts to understand what I had done wrong, how I had failed to preserve our marriage. The conversation shifted to business matters. The strange situation with Daniel temporarily set aside as we tackled the day's priorities. By late afternoon, I was deep in contract negotiations for our Asian expansion when Victor buzzed my intercom. "Ms. Reynolds, I apologize for the interruption, but there's a Ms. Julia Harrington here insisting on seeing you. She says she's Mr. Harrington's sister." I froze, pen hovering over the contract page. Julia. I hadn't seen or spoken to her since the divorce, though we'd been close during my marriage to Daniel. She'd been traveling abroad for work when Daniel left me, and upon her return had reached out with genuine sympathy, clearly disapproving of her brother's actions. We'd exchanged a few messages, but our connection had gradually faded as we both moved forward with our lives. "Did she say what this is regarding?" I asked, already suspecting it connected to Daniel's recent behavior. "Only that it's important and personal," Victor replied. "She seems quite earnest, not confrontational." After a moment's hesitation, I decided to see her. "Send her in, please." Moments later, Julia appeared in my doorway, looking much as I remembered, tall and slender like her brother, with the same striking blue eyes, though hers had always held a warmth Daniel's often lacked. She'd aged well in the 3 years since. I'd seen her dark hair now styled in a sophisticated bob rather than the long waves I remembered. "Megan," she said, relief evident in her voice. "Thank you for seeing me. I wasn't sure you would." I gestured to the sitting area in the corner of my office, moving from behind my desk to join her there. "Of course, Julia. It's been a long time." She settled on the sofa, her posture tense despite her attempt at casual demeanor. "You look wonderful," she offered, her eyes taking in my executive attire, the impressive office, the view of Manhattan spread out behind me. Though I shouldn't be surprised. Your keynote speech was extraordinary. "Thank you," I replied, suddenly aware of how surreal this moment was, sitting across from my former sister-in-law in my CEO office, discussing a speech that had explicitly referenced her brother's betrayal. "But I suspect you didn't come here to compliment my public speaking." Julia sighed, running a hand through her hair, a gesture so reminiscent of Daniel, it sent an unexpected pang through me. "No, I didn't." She paused, seeming to gather her thoughts. "I'm here about Daniel." "I assumed as much," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "He's been quite persistent in trying to reach me, though notably vague about his reasons." She nodded, a flicker of something like embarrassment crossing her face. "I know, he's not. He hasn't been himself lately. After seeing your keynote, he watched the live stream, you know. Something changed in him. He became obsessed with needing to talk to you, to explain something." "Julia," I said gently but firmly, "Daniel and I have already spoken. He applied for a position here. We had a conversation. I accepted his apology. Whatever closure he's seeking now, I'm not obligated to provide it." "It's not about closure," she countered, leaning forward slightly. "It's about this." She reached into her handbag and withdrew an envelope, worn at the edges as if it had been handled repeatedly. She held it out to me, her expression solemn. I made no move to take it. "What is this?" "A letter," she replied. "One he wrote to you 3 years ago, the day after he left. He never sent it." I frowned, increasingly uncomfortable with where this conversation was heading. "Julia, with all due respect, I have no interest in reading old letters or revisiting that painful time. Whatever Daniel wrote and chose not to send is his business, not mine." "Please," she persisted, still holding out the envelope. "I wouldn't be here if it wasn't important. Daniel doesn't even know I have this. I found it while helping him pack for a move last month. He thought he'd lost it years ago." Curiosity warred with my desire to maintain boundaries. Why does it matter now, 3 years later? What could possibly be in that letter that would change anything about our current reality? Julia hesitated, clearly weighing how much to reveal. "I read it," she admitted. "And it explains. Things you deserve to know, about why he really left, about Rachel, about decisions he made that had nothing to do with your ambition or your marriage." The deliberate vagueness was both intriguing and frustrating. "Can you be more specific?" She shook her head. "It's not my story to tell, but I believe, no, I know, that you'll want this information, even if it changes nothing about your current path." I studied her face, searching for signs of manipulation or ulterior motive, but found only sincerity. Julia had always been straightforward, often to the point of bluntness. If she believed this letter contained information I should have, perhaps it did. With reluctance, I accepted the envelope. It was lighter than expected, containing perhaps a single sheet of paper. My name was written on the front in Daniel's precise handwriting, the letters slightly smudged as if the ink had been exposed to moisture. "Thank you," Julia said, visible relief in her expression. "Whether you choose to read it or not, at least now you have the choice Daniel should have, given you 3 years ago." She rose to leave but paused at the door. "For what it's worth, I've always admired your strength, Megan. Even before, when I didn't fully understand the dynamics of your marriage. Watching you rebuild your life, achieve such remarkable success, it's been inspiring." The compliment touched me, especially coming from someone who knew both Daniel and me so intimately. "Thank you, Julia. That means a great deal." After she left, I sat holding the unopened envelope, conflicting emotions swirling through me. Part of me wanted to tear it open immediately. Another part preferred to maintain the clean break I'd established, to continue forward without reopening old wounds. I placed the envelope in my desk drawer, deciding to postpone the decision. Whatever it contained had waited 3 years. It could wait until I finished my current priorities. By late evening, most of the office had cleared out, leaving me alone with the skyline glittering beyond my windows and the envelope still untouched in my drawer. Sophia had texted to check if I wanted company for dinner, but I'd declined, needing space to process the day's unexpected developments. Finally, unable to focus on the remaining work before me, I retrieved the envelope. Its seal had already been broken, presumably when Julia discovered and read it. I slid out the single sheet of paper inside, unfolded it, and began to read. "Megan, by the time you read this, I'll have been gone a full day. I'm writing now from a hotel room, surrounded by the few possessions I took with me, feeling a coward for leaving as I did. The story I told you, about your ambition, about Rachel, about growing apart, none of that was true. The real reason I left has nothing to do with our marriage and everything to do with my own failures. 3 months ago, I made a catastrophic error in judgment with the Pendleton case. I altered evidence, not fabricated, but selectively edited in a way that constitutes serious ethical misconduct. I convinced myself it was justified because my client was innocent, because the evidence had been improperly handled by police, because the system had failed him. Montgomery and Reed discovered it during internal review. They gave me a choice: resign quietly with their recommendation intact, or face ethics charges that would likely end my career. I chose to resign, effective immediately. The partnership track, the future we'd planned, it's all gone. I haven't told you because I'm ashamed, because I've built my identity around being the successful one, the provider, the one with the stellar career trajectory. Because I couldn't bear for you to see me as I am, flawed, disgraced, starting over. Rachel knows. She helped cover the initial tracks, thinking she was just supporting a mentor. Now she's as compromised as I am, and we're clinging to each other out of shared culpability rather than any genuine connection. I'm leaving not because you're too ambitious, but because I'm not ambitious enough in the right ways, in integrity, in honesty, in the courage to face consequences. I'm leaving because I can't stand for you to watch my disgrace unfold, To see the man you married revealed as someone who compromised everything he claimed to stand for. This letter is my one attempt at honesty, though I don't expect it absolves anything. You deserved a partner who cherished your ambition instead of resenting it, who matched your integrity instead of corrupting it. I'm sorry for the pain I've caused and will cause. More than that, I'm sorry for the man I've shown myself to be. Daniel. I set the letter down, hands trembling slightly. The revelation was so unexpected, so contrary to the narrative I'd accepted for 3 years, that I struggled to assimilate it into my understanding of what had happened between us. Daniel hadn't left because of my ambition. He hadn't left for Rachel. He'd left because he'd committed professional misconduct, faced disgrace, and couldn't bear for me to witness his fall from grace. The irony was staggering. All this time, I'd believed his departure was a rejection of me, of my drive, my goals, my authentic self. I'd rebuilt my life around reclaiming what I thought he'd deemed unsuitable, unlovable. I'd constructed an entire narrative of self-recovery based on his supposed dismissal of my ambition. But that narrative, while empowering, had been built on a fundamental misunderstanding. He hadn't rejected my ambition. He'd been running from his own disgrace. My phone rang, startling me from my thoughts. Daniel's name flashed on the screen. For the first time in 3 years, I answered his call directly. "I have the letter," I said without preamble. "Julia brought it to me today." A sharp intake of breath then. "You've read it?" "Yes." Silence stretched between us, heavy with unspoken questions. Finally, he spoke again, his voice strained. "I never meant for you to find out this way. When I saw your keynote, heard you talk about how I'd made you feel about your ambition, I couldn't let that stand. Not when it was my failure, my cowardice that destroyed everything." "Why didn't you send it?" I asked, the question that had been burning since I finished reading. "Why let me believe I was somehow deficient for 3 years when you knew the truth?" "Because I was a coward," he answered simply. "Because letting you think it was about your ambition was easier than admitting I'd betrayed everything I claimed to value. And later, when I realized what I'd done to you, it seemed too late to correct the narrative. The damage was done." I sat with that for a moment, processing his admission. "What happened with the ethics charges, with your career?" Montgomery and Reed kept it quiet, as promised. I worked at smaller firms under their discreet supervision for 2 years, proving I could practice ethically. Recently, they've begun referring some minor clients to me again. It's a long road back to where I was, to where we were, but I'm committed to it. "And Rachel?" A heavy sigh. "We lasted 6 months. The foundation was rotten from the start, mutual desperation rather than genuine connection. She's moved to Chicago, started fresh. We don't speak." I gazed out at the city lights, absorbing this reframing of the past 3 years. The silence between us wasn't uncomfortable now, but contemplative, both of us adjusting to this shared reality after years of separate misconceptions. "What now?" Daniel finally asked, his voice soft. "Does knowing change anything for you?" It was the question I'd been asking myself since finishing the letter. Did this revelation fundamentally alter anything about my current life, my path forward, my understanding of myself? "It changes the context," I said slowly, choosing my words with care. "It changes my understanding of what happened between us. But it doesn't change where I am now, or the journey that brought me here." "I understand," he replied, disappointment evident but restrained. "I didn't expect it would. I just couldn't let you continue believing your ambition was ever the problem." "It wasn't. It was always your strength, one I admired even when I couldn't match it." Something shifted in me then, a final piece sliding into place. The woman who had sobbed on her kitchen floor 3 years ago, questioning her worth when Daniel left, had evolved into someone stronger, clearer, more authentically herself, not in spite of his betrayal, but catalyzed by it. That evolution was real, valuable, transformative, regardless of what had truly motivated his departure. The growth I'd experienced, the self-reclamation I'd undertaken, the boundaries I'd established. All of it remained valid, important, defining. "Thank you," I said finally, "for telling me the truth, even if it's years late. It helps to have the full picture." "I wish I'd been brave enough to give it to you from the start," he replied, regret heavy in his voice. "Maybe things would have been different." "Maybe," I acknowledged. "Or maybe this was the path we both needed to walk to become who we are now." Sometimes the most painful catalysts create the most necessary transformations. After we hung up, I remained at my desk, watching the city beneath me, feeling strangely peaceful despite the seismic revelation. The narrative I'd constructed about my marriage's end had been partially wrong, but the journey I'd undertaken in response had been entirely right. I'd needed to rediscover my authentic ambition, to reclaim my right to pursue success without apology, to establish boundaries that protected my essential self, regardless of why Daniel had really left. His true motivations didn't invalidate my growth. They simply provided a more complete context for understanding our shared past. My phone buzzed with a text from Sophia. "Everything okay? You've been radio silent all evening." I smiled, appreciating her concern. "Yes, processing some unexpected information, but all good. Breakfast tomorrow? I have quite a story to tell." Intrigued, 8 a.m. at Maison Marcel. Can't wait. Setting down my phone, I gathered my things to leave for the night. As I switched off my office lights, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the darkened window, silhouetted against the city skyline, standing tall in the space I had earned, through perseverance, talent, and refusing to diminish myself for anyone's comfort. The woman looking back at me was whole, authentic, powerful, shaped by betrayal and misconception but not defined by either. She had rebuilt her life on her own terms, reclaimed her ambition without apology, and created success that extended beyond professional achievement to encompass true self-possession. That reality remained unaltered by Daniel's revelation. If anything, knowing the full truth only reinforced the value of the journey I'd undertaken, a journey that had transformed a painful catalyst into powerful purpose. The next morning over breakfast, I shared the letter's contents with Sophia, watching her expression shift from shock to indignation to thoughtful consideration. "So all this time," she said, stirring her coffee, "he let you believe it was about your ambition, when really it was about his ethical failure. That's actually worse in some ways." "It is," I agreed, "but also clarifying. It explains inconsistencies I never quite reconciled. The timing, the suddenness, the way he seemed almost relieved when I focused on my career as the reason." Sophia leaned forward, studying my face. "How are you feeling about it? Really?" I considered the question, wanting to provide an honest answer rather than a polished one. Vindicated, in a way. My ambition was never the problem, which I've come to believe over time, but it's different having confirmation. Sad, too, that we both lost so much to his inability to be honest about his mistakes. "And does it change anything moving forward? About your perspective on relationships, on balance, on the message you've been sharing?" "That's what I've been reflecting on most," I admitted. "And I don't think it does, fundamentally. The fact that my ambition wasn't what drove Daniel away doesn't change the reality that many women do face that exact dynamic, being made to feel that their drive is somehow unfeminine, unsuitable, a threat to relationship harmony." Sophia nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Your personal catalyst may have been misunderstood, but the journey it prompted was authentic and necessary." "Exactly," I agreed. "The letter changes the context of my starting point, but not the value of where I've arrived." After breakfast, Walking to the office through the crisp morning air, I felt a profound sense of completion, as if a story that had been missing its final pages had suddenly been made whole. Not because Daniel's revelation changed my current reality, but because it allowed me to truly close the chapter of my past with full understanding. The woman who had stood on the summit stage, who had built a life of authentic ambition and clear boundaries, who had refused to diminish herself for anyone's comfort, she remained exactly who she was meant to be. The path that had led to her emergence was now fully illuminated, every shadow of confusion dispelled by truth. That evening, I added a new section to the leadership journal I'd been maintaining since accepting the CEO position, a practice recommended by my executive coach to document lessons learned and wisdom gained through professional challenges. The most powerful journey, I wrote, often begins with a misunderstanding. We set out to disprove a false premise, to heal a wound inflicted by incomplete information, to reclaim what we believe has been taken from us. But the transformation that occurs along that path remains valid, valuable, and vital, even when we later discover our catalyst was not what we thought. The growth is real, the strength is earned, the clarity is genuine, and perhaps most importantly, the woman who emerges, authentic, ambitious, unapologetic in her pursuit of fulfillment, she belongs entirely to herself, regardless of what prompted her becoming. I closed the journal, set down my pen, and looked out at the Manhattan skyline from my Tribeca loft. 3 years ago, devastated by abandonment and misunderstanding, I could never have imagined this moment, this life I'd built, this strength I'd discovered, this authentic integration of ambition and fulfillment. My husband had left me after I paid his student loans, ending our 8-year marriage with a letter on my pillow. Yesterday, he sat across from me in my CEO office, finally telling the truth about why he'd really gone. The journey between those 2 points, that was the real story, not a tale of revenge or vindication, but of reclamation. Of remembering that my ambition was never the problem. Of recognizing that my worth was never dependent on someone else's comfort with my success. That journey, with all its pain and revelation, had led me exactly where I needed to be. Standing firmly in my power, leading with authentic ambition, and choosing myself without apology or regret. No revelation, however unexpected, could diminish the value of that transformation. If anything, the full truth only confirmed what I had come to believe through hard-won experience, that sometimes the most painful endings create the most necessary beginnings. And that choosing yourself isn't selfish. It's essential for becoming the person you were always meant to be. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.